Welcome to the First Baptist on Fifth podcast. I'm Kyle Caudle, the Associate Pastor for Youth, Missions, and Adults, and host of the special podcast series to help guide you through the season of Lent. I'll be interviewing folks from our church to discuss devotional practices of the season of Lent. And today I'm joined by Reverend David Williamson, Associate Pastor for Worship, Arts, and Administration here at First on Fifth. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Kyle.
So Lent has become one of my favorite parts of the Christian year, and I grew up as a Baptist that didn't really celebrate the Christian year or the Christian calendar other than Easter and Christmas. But I discovered in some Baptist churches later when I was a young adult this tradition of Ash Wednesday. And so I immediately loved this service the first time that I got the ashes on my forehead and everything, and then you have a lot of times communion with it, so the bread and the cup and this reminder that you are dust. These kind of basic and honest expressions that really claim a truth on us that often we don't want to admit, that life is precious and also fleeting. And so it's something I think as a culture we avoid. I wonder what you think of Ash Wednesday and kind of the practices of Lent and how that reminds you maybe of mortality, but also hope.
Yeah. Well, you've said a lot in that for Baptist or evangelical Christians, we decided to claim the two easy holy days of Easter and Christmas. Who doesn't like Easter and Christmas? But when you come to Ash Wednesday, Joel says to call a solemn fast. Mm-hmm. And for those of us that come to worship and we're laughing and talking with one another and we think that's great energy in the room to say, let's have a solemn fast. And solemn doesn't mean sad, but it does mean serious. Mm-hmm. And like you said, our mortality is pretty serious, and to be marked with the sign of our mortality really does say a whole lot. So I think it really is a good beginning to the Lenten season for the seriousness of the Lenten season. But maybe that's one reason that evangelical Christians might have avoided it in the past, that it was a little bit too serious or too much in your face, and they'd rather, or we would all rather, have a more celebrative attitude to things.
Yeah, I like that. So personally, thinking about your own experience, what is something about Lent that resonates with you and your own personal spirituality?
Well, I didn't observe Lent growing up, so it was something new to me. And the fact that it's a season that is clearly marked off, my experience says if I don't mark something off and be intentional about it, I might not observe it at all. And so if you say, we're going to have 40 days where we have this reflective time where we're thinking about our spiritual lives, our relationship with God, our relationship with one another, what I think of myself, and I'm going to mark 40 days off to do that. I think it was Thomas Merton that said, you need a holy time to teach you that all time is holy. And if I don't mark off some time that says I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this spiritual introspection, then maybe I'll never do it. Mm-hmm. And so to mark off 40 days to do that, I think is one of the really good things about the Lenten season that I just never practiced growing up.
So that makes me think about one thing, especially in the Hebrew Bible, Sabbath is so important. So it's that even a weekly rhythm that you're going to rest a day. We're not too good with marking things off. We don't leave a lot of margin. But then to hear 40 days, that's a lot. That's a long time. What's the significance of 40 days for Lent?
Well, and you see that the 40-day period a lot, and with Jesus and spending 40 days in the desert, maybe there's some roots in that. But the good thing to me about Lent is if you get tired in those 40 days, between Ash Wednesday and Easter, there's 46 days. Mm-hmm. And so the Sundays aren't part of Lent in a sense. They're in Lent, but they're not of Lent. And so my understanding is that the Sundays were to be little Easters to help us through this time of introspection. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a certain rhythm in that you have 6 days and then you have a seventh day to maybe to lighten up a little bit and to help you through the 40 days. But you're right, 40 days is a long period of time to spend in doing that. Yeah, but the little Easters.
Yeah, the
on
little
Sunday
Easters.
help.
I like that. I've heard people say that. And you mentioned the word there, introspective. Do you think of Lent as a more inward or introspective season in the Christian year?
Yeah, even starting with Ash Wednesday, when we're called to this solemn feast day, and it says to rend your heart and not your garments. Because the sign of I guess of confession was to rend your clothing, but it says no, something inside of you needs to happen, and we give attention to our inward spiritual lives more than these, because we talk about taking on outward practices, but if something's not going on inside, then Lent's not having its full effect.
Yeah, my next interview will be talking to Julie, who wrote about Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is teaching that he's not interested in showy fasts or showy prayer, but it is this kind of inward disposition. I'm not seeking attention, but it's still something that's vital to the season. So
in the Sermon on the Mount, when it talks about beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them. So it doesn't say don't practice piety. It says don't practice piety in order for people to see it. It says the same thing with fasting. When you fast, don't look dismal like the hypocrites do. It says wash your face, comb your hair, and fix yourself up so that people don't know that you're fasting. So if you only do it to be seen by others, Jesus says, then you've got your reward. That's all the reward you're going to get.
I also think that's a really good pitch by Jesus for the beauty care industry. Make sure
I would know nothing about that.
You do not fast from your moisturizer.
That's right.
You need to look glad. Yeah. So we take part in different rhythms in Lent. One of the rhythms I think we're trying to do is just some kind of devotional practice. So we have, and that's where I really learned that, there's 40 plus days because we're trying to get 40 plus people to write devotions so we decided to do our own devotions. So one rhythm that people may take on is reading or even writing devotions. Can you think of other rhythms maybe of this season that are helpful to us?
Yeah, I think most of the time these rhythms involve scripture reading or devotional reading, setting aside a set time of prayer. We're studying Brother Lawrence's book, and it says that he had an awareness of God in every part of his day. Washing the dishes, repairing the sandals, whatever he did, he had a great awareness, but his superiors said, you need to have a set time of prayer. And he was obedient to them. And it says it's important for us just to do things out of obedience, knowing that some good can come out of that. But for Brother Lawrence, he had an awareness of God, throughout his day. And to me, a big part of Lent is increasing our awareness of God. When we think about the Garden of Eden and that Adam and Eve sin, it's less about they were separated from God after that, but they were blinded to the awareness of the presence of God. And we spend the rest of our lives in this fog almost, trying to rediscover the awareness of the God who is ever present. And Lent really does offer a great opportunity to increase our awareness of God. So the practices have no value in themselves if they don't really work to that end, to increase our awareness of the God who is ever present with us, not just in Lent, but throughout the year. The other thing is if we're not able to maintain that thread that's established in Lent, then what good is this practice if we can't carry it on into the rest of our lives? Mm-hmm. So I try to look at Lent in that way. What can I establish that I can keep going on after the 40 days are over with?
Yeah. So this podcast will come out on the day before Ash Wednesday, so also known as Fat Tuesday or Shrove. Shrove Tuesday, Mardi Gras, all that stuff. Right. What goes into it as far as from a worship, since you plan a lot of worship as minister of worship here, what goes into an Ash Wednesday service that may be different than say, our standard Sunday morning worship experience.
Yeah, and we've touched on this a little bit already in that the whole atmosphere when you come into this space, once again, this holy space that we use for worship, the attitude is different in that maybe it is, it's a solemn occasion. Maybe there's less chatter when you come into the room. The elements of the service center around some of the symbols of confession and of our mortality. We will burn some incense. Baptists don't burn incense very much, but our prayers rise like incense, and we'll burn some incense that represents our prayers rising to God. There'll be prayers of confession in the service. We will be marked with the sign of the cross. With ashes, the symbol of our mortality. So it's a pretty serious service that says be reminded of you only have so much time on this earth, and we need to be examining our lives, and this is the beginning of that examination in the Ash Wednesday service.
Yeah, I was trying to think through something you said. So during that... During the service, not only the mortality, the ashes, is there something we say in particular that you think that kind of really jumps out to people, like words that may be said that we don't say at another time?
Maybe it is remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. We don't talk like that to one another. However, when something happens in your life that reminds you of your mortality, and maybe a lot of us don't have that opportunity, that those don't come to us very often, that we're confronted with our mortality, with some sickness that comes into our life, or a loved one who passes away. Those are always times to remember, well, we're not all going to be here forever. I think the church has a responsibility to remind folks this is something we should have in front of us all the time. Mm-hmm. And that it certainly changes the way we relate to one another, the way we conduct our own lives, and the way we relate in our relationship with God. So to remember our mortality carries great significance as to how we live our lives out.
Yeah, there are certain professions, I think, that do have that proximity to mortality. And ministry is one of them, dealing with funerals and obviously people that work in healthcare and that face that. They're a little more aware of it, but I would say by and large, culturally, we want to avoid that.
Right.
And anything we can to live longer or, not to age, those kind of things, we gravitate toward and not towards reflecting on what may be more somber or solemn. We often associate fasting during Lent. So oftentimes, like when I'm talking with youth here, they'll say, "Well, what are you giving up for Lent?" They'll ask one another, "What are you giving up?" Do you think of Lent as a time to give up something, or how do you think about fasting as it relates to Lent?
And I've heard Lent both ways of what are you giving up or what are you taking on? Is there another spiritual practice you're taking on? The interesting thing about fasting that I think in the scriptures, often it's prayer and fasting. You're pairing something together. And if you're fasting or giving something up, you're making room for something else. I mean, I can fast if I want to lose weight, if I want to give up sugar to live a healthier lifestyle. But that's not really the motivation of fasting from a spiritual perspective. You're generally giving something up to allow a space for something else to happen. And it does remind us that the spiritual life is not formulaic. I can't give you 5 practices and guarantee that this is going to happen at the end of it. And so fasting might just be opening up a space or taking a spiritual posture, a spiritual stance that allows the Spirit to do something. But if we never take that stance or take that posture, then maybe the Spirit won't work. So Lent is really about assuming a posture that allows room for the Spirit to work in our lives.
I like that. I've also heard people talk about fasting, to fast from we all often think of food or things that we enjoy, like luxuries of life that we fast from. But they're like, what if you fasted from judgment? Or what if you fasted from the need to get angry or like to hurry through life? And those kind of ways, that makes you more aware of the ways that you're not patient or the ways
Sure.
that you're not. So it's almost like you're taking on a new practice through trying to give up something.
Right. That's good. I know Cindy Lee in her book, Our Unforming, talks about hindrances to our spiritual lives. And a lot of times we think bad habits are those, and they can be. Bad habits can be a hindrance to our spiritual lives. She says one of the greatest hindrances to our spiritual life is indifference. And when we enter into the Lenten season and become serious about our spiritual lives, perhaps it's so easy to go through life and just be indifferent. What's the big deal? Why should I spend 40 days doing this? Why should I consider the way that I treat my neighbor? Why should I consider how the charitable acts that I do to help those that are less fortunate than I am? And I think indifference can be a real big part of that, and to address our indifference towards spiritual things is an important part of what Lent is as well.
So would you say that the way she sees indifference is like apathy?
Yeah.
Like just this lack of care or
Just
concern
not
for
even
something?
going through life. We can go through so much of life just absolutely unaware. And we can do this with all aspects of our lives. And until we're forced to slow down, sometimes our health forces us to slow down or something does. But in the best sense, these seasons that we measure off force us to slow down or to take greater inventory of how we're living our lives.
Well, Lent is a season where we slow down, where we turn inward. And thank you, David, for being with us today as we talk about the rhythms of this season. And thank you for joining us on the First on Fifth podcast. If you would like to find out more about our devotions that we're offering through the season, you can follow the links below or visit firstonfifth.org, as well as other offerings for this Lenten season for your spiritual growth. Thank you.